Hello and welcome to another edition of Advocate with Albert Abkarian. We have a very important guest with us today, somebody that would probably make a very important decision in everyone's life in California. Without any further ado, I want to introduce you to our guest, Nathan Hochman. Nathan, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me on your show, Albert.
Well, we appreciate it. We know about your background. We had you on your show before, on our show before, and you gave us your background. It's an incredible background with your father, your mother, how you, as a former U.S. District attorney, former U.S. deputy attorney, right?
I was fortunate enough to be a former assistant U.S. attorney, which is a federal prosecutor, and a former U.S. Assistant Attorney General appointed by President George W. Bush and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate.
That's incredible background. Why don't we just go right into it and ask you questions that has to do with how on an everyday an attorney general could make a difference. It's not just the district attorneys in each county, but the attorney general makes decisions that affects Californian lives every single day. I just read a recent Berkeley IGS poll that found 78% of Californians say crime has risen statewide, with 65% saying crime has increased in their area. Another poll by Political Morning Consult shows 75% of voters blame the liberal policies on defund the police the reason for what we're going through. Can you kind of talk about defund the police? Can you talk about what your vision would be when you get elected and what you would like to do in California if you're elected as a nominee first, as a top two, to go, hopefully you get 51% and you don't have to even have a runoff. But let's say if you have a runoff, what would your priorities be having to do with crime?
Well, a whole great series of questions, Albert. Let me see if I can do my best to answer them. Let's start with the role of the California Attorney General. Most people don't understand that it is actually the second most important position, right behind the governor, in the state of California. You run an office of over 4,000 lawyers, which if it was its own law firm, would be the second largest law firm in the United States. And one of the constitutional obligations of the California Attorney General is that you're the chief law enforcement officer of the state. Effectively, that means you're like a super DA, that all 58 county DAs across California, in essence, report to you. So if you have a situation like we have in Los Angeles, where George Gascon has refused to do his job, the California Attorney General can come in, and if that was myself, would come in and take over the prosecutions where George Gascon has refused to do it. Like the best example is the LAPD off-duty officer who got killed by 4 gang members, in an armed shooting. And the LADA Gascon refused to bring the gang or gun enhancements, although a gang member committed the crime and the gun was used in the crime. So the sheriff, LA Sheriff Villanueva, who's endorsed me, and LA Police Chief Michael Moore brought the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office, not to the DA's office, which is its normal home. And when I told Sheriff Villanueva then, I said, if I am the Attorney General and George Gascon or anyone refuses to bring the full extent of the law to a murder of an LAPD officer, or for that matter, any crime, I would go ahead and take over that prosecution from DA Gascon, bring in the California Attorney General's office, and the state courthouse would be open for that prosecution, not just the federal courthouse. And I think it's an incredibly strong power, as well as, for instance, the notion that every time California is sued or sues someone, it's the California Attorney General's office. Every time there's an appeal in California, it's the California Attorney General's office. And anytime a proposition comes before the voters, the California Attorney General's office decides what it should be called and how you summarize it, which is an incredibly powerful tool that the Attorney General's office has.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what we see as the rampant crime where people are just taking things off the shelves and walking out. What could an attorney general's office do when it comes to that, and to bring a bit of a law and order back to California, which, in my opinion, has completely gone away under Rob Bontas and District Gascon and a number of other DA's offices who refuse to enforce the law?
Well, here's what the California Attorney General should and would do, especially if I am that California Attorney General. You basically three things. Rather than treating the police as the enemy, as Rob Bonta has done, Nathan Hochman would treat the police as a partner in the solutions. Rather than going ahead and defunding or decreasing the budgets of the police, as Rob Bonta has done, Nathan Hochman would actually seek to increase those budgets. Because if we want a better hired, trained, and supervised police force, guess what? We actually have to pay for it, especially if we're going to increase the scope of their duties. And finally, you are absolutely right, Albert. Crimes have to have consequences. And it doesn't mean we go back to the blanket policies of mass incarceration and throw everyone in jail for 100 years. But now we're on the other end of the pendulum swing where we believe in no incarceration. I believe in something called the hard middle. And the reason it's hard is it means you have to do an individualized analysis of every defendant and their criminal history that commit a crime, what crime they committed, and the often overlooked part, the impact on the victim. And I believe that based on my 30 years of criminal justice experience as a prosecutor, a U.S. Assistant Attorney General, and a defense attorney, I'm able to very well calibrate that line of who are the public safety threats and need to be imprisoned, and who are the first-time, non-violent, non-serious offenders who can serve their debt to society in some other way, like community service or home detention.
Let's talk about that, because that's an important distinction. People want criminals to go to jail, get rehabilitated, and come out. In my opinion, that's the job of you incarcerating someone, so they can go in, and when they come out, they are a more productive member of the society. I know it's a utopia kind of an attitude with the type of jail system we have now, but it really is true. Somebody that goes to jail shouldn't come out worse than they were when they went into the system. So I know you're a little bit more moderate when it comes to, not moderate, you're more practical when it comes to rehabilitation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think practical is the correct word. Common sense is the correct word. But you're right. You're absolutely right, Albert. My father used to say that the most dangerous person in society is the person with nothing to lose. So if we go ahead and put someone in prison, we don't offer them any training or a skill set. We give them $50 when they get out and say good luck. Guess what? If the only thing they've known up until then is how to commit a crime, it's not going to be a shock. They're going to go back to criminal activity. And the statistics don't lie. Over 50% of the people who go to jail will be back in jail within 2 years. I'm a huge fan of, while people are in prison, bring in effective rehabilitation programs that will give people a skill set in prison. And then, this is the other part of the equation, help them get that first job through reentry programs after they get out of prison. Because as I know, having represented people who have gotten felonies on their records, it's very hard because nobody wants to hire an ex-felon for their first job. But if you can actually help, if the government can actually help you get that first job, it can be an enormously successful investment to reduce the recidivism rate. And I point you to the San Mateo jails as probably my best example. What they decided to do is they built basically a kitchen, and they taught the inmates how to work food services. Then they partnered with Facebook, and Facebook said, look, if they graduate your program in the prison, we'll actually hire them for their first job in Facebook's food services. And guess what? These people had a job, they felt productive in society, and recidivism rate amongst these people dropped to under 5%. So from over 50 to under 5%, an incredibly smart investment that I believe we should actually expand out for all of California.
And that's the important word you said, investment. Because really, getting somebody into jail is an investment that you do, because at some point you need to get them out, and you don't want to keep them there for years and years to come. So that is an investment. Now, tell me a little bit about how, because your experience as a defense attorney and as a prosecutor gives you a very interesting overview of the system itself. So tell me a little bit about you being a defense attorney and how that changed your perspective as to how you view the justice system.
See, that's a great point, because what I have found is that if you've only been a prosecutor your whole career, and one of the opponents I have has only been a prosecutor, you look at everybody as a nail and you're the hammer. But you develop a much more broad perspective when you've actually had to work with and represent people fighting for their constitutional rights against government overreach. It makes you very sensitive to making sure that the government does it right, because the government has enormous power to destroy people's lives, but it also has an enormous power to protect society. So figuring out which cases are the valid and just cases, and then going after those cases with the full resources of the government, is absolutely crucial. So I believe that the defense perspective gives me that sort of worldview on, again, who are the true public safety threats and need to be imprisoned, and who are the ones who don't and don't have to be imprisoned. I think that it's too often we only look at a problem through one set of eyes. And I've been lucky enough to have multiple set of eyes to look at this criminal justice problem.
Also including your family background of having your mom being in nonprofit organizations and your dad being a tax attorney really gives you a different perspective than some of the other people who've had just law enforcement in their background. Not that prosecutorial background is bad, but again, having both sides, having a balanced view and knowing what to do and seeing both sides of the case, it's extremely important. Tell me a little bit about why people should vote for Nathan Hochman instead of Eric Early, instead of some of the other opponents. I can tell you why you shouldn't. I'm not even bringing Rob Bonta into this because I think people understand why they're not voting for him. But again, why should somebody vote for Nathan Hochman instead of some of the other candidates in the ballot?
Well, I think that what really separates me out is the comprehensive type of experience that I've had in criminal, civil, and appellate litigation. Let me start with criminal. I have 30 years of criminal justice experience as a federal prosecutor. I did it for 7, an assistant U.S. attorney under President George W. Bush back in Washington, D.C., where I ran the tax division and 350 lawyers in a $100 million budget, and also as a defense attorney. Now, for instance, Rob Bonta, and we don't want to talk about him, but let's talk about him for a second, because he shares as much law enforcement experience as my Labradoodle Lou, which is 0. So I'll take my 30 years against his 0 any day of the week. And Eric Early, while a fine attorney, also has 0 years of law enforcement experience. And why that is so crucial is that you're the chief law enforcement officer of the state of California. If you were going into surgery, it'd be nice to have a surgeon, a very skilled, experienced surgeon, do your surgery, who has proven results for 30 years, as opposed to just a family doctor who's never been a surgeon and is hoping he might get it right. And unfortunately, that's the truth about Rob Bonta, and Eric Early also shares 0 law enforcement experience. One of my other opponents is Anne-Marie Schubert. She is a DA in Sacramento, has been a fine DA, running a very small office in Sacramento, but she's never been a defense attorney. As we talked about a moment ago, that gives you a certain perspective on where the line should be between the people who need to be incarcerated and the ones that don't. But she also lacks experience for 2/3 of the job of California Attorney General. She lacks civil litigation experience when California is sued or sues someone, and I've been doing that for over 20 years. And she lacks appellate experience because the California Attorney General's office is the representative of the state on every level of appeal, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. I have argued personally and written the briefs for over 30 different appeals in federal courts across this country over the last 20 years. Anne-Marie Schubert completely lacks this experience and therefore she lacks 2/3 of the experience to be the California Attorney General. So I believe because of my experience and because of my message, partnering with the police, funding the police, making sure crimes have consequences, I separate myself out not only just from Eric Early and Anne-Marie Schubert, but certainly from Rob Bonta.
I see behind you have basketballs and baseballs, and so you're also a supporter of sports and which is much appreciated as a
You know, a lifelong, grew up with the Dodgers, the Lakers, the Kings, the Rams, version 1 LA Rams. Now they're back to being LA Rams again. Hooray. Big LA sports fan. Although I must say, for any Californians that are listening to this who aren't in Los Angeles, once LA is not competing anymore, I'll root for any other California team against a non-California team.
That's true. That is 100% true. Let's talk about again. I do know some of the candidates that are running. Eric Early is a wonderful gentleman, and I've had a chance to meet with him and talk to him. I think your qualification definitely speaks for itself, and I think it's a great thing to have. Let's talk about Proposition 47. Let me read you a quick stat. It says in the Berkeley IGS poll, 57% of California voters indicated support for a repeal of 47, and they basically said that they really didn't know what they were voting for. Could you talk about Proposition 47 and how that has hurt justice system in California?
Certainly. So in 2014, Proposition 47 was on the ballot. And one of the powers of the California Attorney General is determining what the title and ballot summary is for every proposition. Now, 2014 was Kamala Harris as your Attorney General. She determined that we should call Proposition 47 the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. And who doesn't want a safe neighborhood and school? What she didn't call it is we're going to turn felony property crimes into misdemeanor property crimes so nobody gets prosecuted act. Had she called it that, I don't think the voters would have been voting for it. But she basically misled the voters into what she titled and summarized the ballot proposition for. And 8 years later, in 2022, we're reaping the consequences of what happens when you go ahead and allow people to steal just under $950, and then you have prosecutors who won't actually prosecute misdemeanor property crimes, so these people actually go unpunished. So that is an enormous power of the California Attorney General, and it shows how it can be misused. I pledge to you and every voter that I will be transparent and I will be honest about the ballot title and summary, whether I like it or not. I call it the balls and the strikes fairly, and let the voters decide whether or not they want to enact it.
And what's really funny about Proposition 47 is that Proposition 47 actually hurts the people who can't afford it. For example, a small mom and pop shop cannot and does not have the type of insurance that, let's say, Target and Walgreens does. Somebody walks out of Target and Walgreens, they can actually go ahead and eat the losses, where a mom and pop store, jewelry store, a smaller store cannot. And Proposition 47, by saying $950, really targets the mom and pop store, not the big Targets and Walmarts.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, in fact, many of the small businesses, between the pandemic and between these thefts, where the police aren't even responding anymore, because the police know if they write up the report, the DA is going to decline the case. And what happens is a lot of these small businesses aren't even calling the police because they know that the police won't respond or won't write up the case because the DA won't prosecute it. It's creating this spiral of lawlessness in our society where one person walks out of a small business with under $950, then 3 people run out of a Walgreens, 80 people run out of a Nordstrom's. You got smash and grab robberies, follow home robberies, and double-digit rises in homicides. My goal is to stop the spiral of lawlessness going down and reverse it and create a spiral of lawfulness where basically those small crimes get prosecuted so that hopefully it reverses out people thinking about committing even bigger crimes.
And you said one thing in one of your articles that I really appreciated. You said, my job of the Attorney General is to enforce the law. I mean, that really is the job of an attorney general's office, and it's not being done right now. Let's go over a few of the things that I saw on your website. And I want to add, you had 4 items that were important to you. You said fentanyl and drug use, crime, homelessness, and human trafficking. I want to add to it child molestation, because that's something that is not really talked about, and that is something that is very dear to me. When somebody molests a child, in my opinion, they should go to jail for the rest of their lives, knowing what they're doing. But again, let's talk about the 4 frames plus, I added child molestation to the views that you have and what you want to accomplish. So let's talk about each one of these and get each one of these very short blurbs of them. So drug use, crime, homelessness, human trafficking, child molestation.
Certainly. So let me start with drug use, and I'm going to focus on fentanyl, because fentanyl is turned out to be the most powerful drug that is most likely to cause death amongst people you know, family members, or neighbors. 2 milligrams of fentanyl will actually kill you in 2 minutes, because fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. And it's the ingredients from it are coming from China. They're going to Mexican drug lords, and they're bringing millions of counterfeit tablets into California, like Adderall, Percocet, OxyContin, Xanax. And people are taking these tablets. They order them off of Snapchat. It's that simple. And the DEA has observed that 4 out of 10 of these tablets have a lethal dose of fentanyl. And they're also lacing it in marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, all the different drugs in our society.
Yeah, we just had an incident in town here where somebody took a laced fentanyl and died from it. Somebody that we know, and it's something that is just incredible how careless and how carefree these people are, just doing laced fentanyl into our communities without ever thinking about it.
I mean, I call it the silent assassin, because they estimate that 17 Californians today will be killed by fentanyl poisoning, over 5,000 for the entire year. And imagine if 17 Californians were being killed by a sniper. We would shut down the entire state of California looking for this sniper, and commerce would grind to a halt. We effectively have hundreds, if not thousands, of fentanyl dealer snipers out there killing our kids, killing people in their 20s, their 30s, across racial lines, political lines, gender lines, and whatnot. Yet the California Attorney General, Rob Bonta, has been incredibly silent on this. I would put this issue first and foremost. I would mount a huge enforcement effort that would be federal, state, and local, and begin a massive education campaign targeted to the middle and high schools, to students and their parents, to make them understand the dangers of fentanyl, which is basically 4 out of 10 of these fake pills will kill you. That's worse than the odds in Russian roulette, where if you put 1 bullet in a 6-shooter and spun it, that's 1 out of 6. This is 4 out of 10.
Nathan, let's do this. We have a very short period of time, but I want to hit at least homelessness. Let's talk about homelessness in our last minute and a half, 2 minutes that we have here. So could you just talk about a little bit about what would you do as the Attorney General for homelessness?
My focus on homelessness is to focus on over 70% of the problem, which are people who have serious mental illness, substance abuse disorder, or both. These are people that if you give them a house, they'll be there for about 30 days and then they'll leave, because you haven't dealt with the underlying conditions. I want to do something that's been advocated actually by Governor Newsom, which is to create a third option for the courts. Right now, if someone commits a crime and they're homeless, either they get thrown in jail, which is a useless option for dealing with their mental illness. They get released back on the streets, equally useless, but there should be a third option. And that's option for the court to order mandatory treatment for mental health situations, mental illness, or substance abuse, or both, until that person can actually get cured enough to be back in society. It would be very rigid, the circumstances in which that can be ordered, but we haven't had that option for judges in 30 years. And if we can bring that, the ability for the courts and the legal system and the Attorney General's office to help in a humane way, the homeless population that is suffering from serious mental illness and substance abuse, we will cut the growth of homelessness. In California, you realize we have a quarter of the nation's homeless. We'll cut the growth and start going into the core of homelessness to solve the problem.
Great. Nathan Hochman, I want to thank you for taking the time. I'm sure we're going to be coming back here past June 7th once you have succeeded to either get 51% or at least go for a run-up in November. And we'll have a number of other interviews with you to talk about other issues. Again, we missed human trafficking, child molestation, a number of other issues. So best of luck to you on June 7th. We pray for you. We pray that you will be one of the nominees and look forward to seeing you past June 7th.
And I thank you very much. And I just wanted to remind your voters two things, that June 7th is an open primary. So Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, or anyone registered, can vote for Nathan Hochman for Attorney General. And also that I'm the only candidate that is endorsed by the California Republican Party, Kevin McCarthy, Governor Pete Wilson, DA Steve Cooley, and Jackie Lacey, and Sheriff Villanueva. And I thank you so much, Albert, for allowing me to be on your show again.
Thank you very much, Nathan, and best of luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for staying with us today. We'll have more on Nathan Hochman and other interviews coming up within the next few weeks. Thank you and have a good day.